This essay is the first in a series of 3 on mind control. It discusses some of the motives for mind control and why it continues. Part 2 of the series, Resisting the Mind Control State, describes some methods to protest and resist mind control abuses and atrocities. Part 3, Mental Firewalls, discusses some of the techniques victims have developed to survive the ongoing torture operations. For the purposes of this essay, mind control refers to any method used non-consensually on a victim to covertly and deliberately attempt to control or modify that person's behavior. This occurs in settings where a person has a reasonable expectation not to be violated, such as in his or her home or in his or her private mentation. It is this sort of violation that differentiates a mind control crime from an ordinary social interaction, just as the lack of consent turns sex into rape. Consider street theater as an example. Street theater refers to a form of harassment where a group of torturers act out little skits, either literally on the street or on the internet, in the media, etc., intended to harass and disturb an individual or to otherwise modify the victim's behavior. So if a group of people act out street theater to a random person to disturb him or her, then, while this might be a crime, I would not necessarily call it mind control. It is when surveillance is combined with the skits to both track a person over time for harassment and to obtain personal information about a person to be used in harassment that I would say a mind control operation is being carried out. Of course, there are many sorts of mind control operations, but they all tend to have this sort of feedback setup: violate a person with extreme surveillance and use that surveillance information to target the influencing. It is a classic sort of feedback setup that might be described in terms of the mathematical and engineering fields of control theory, at least in the abstract sense. The surveillance devices can range from phone taps, audio and video bugs in a home or car, internet monitoring, and basic tracking devices, all the way up to advanced satellite surveillance methods, super-sensitive electromagnetic sensor systems with computer analysis, and devices implanted in people's bodies without their consent. The effector or the control variables can range from harassing phone calls, street theater, rumor spreading, power line dimming, and internet messages, all the way up to harassment with microwave devices, acoustic weapons, messages in the media such as TV and newspapers, projecting voices to a person that only he or she can hear, and direct brain stimulation and manipulation. Other mind control methods use techniques such as hypnosis and drugs to influence people, but the methods all have the common thread of the denied and deniable attack against the mind of an individual. The purpose of this essay is not to specifically describe the methods of mind control. More specifics will be given in the later essays of this series, and one can consult books and articles by various authors for the documented history of mind control technology and operations in the USC. For example, the articles at the Mind Control, Technology, Techniques, and Politics website at http://www.datafilter.com/mc. Even if you do not believe that all of this is currently happening, though it is, you should still be concerned. Based on public, open sources, it is clear to almost anyone that the technology will be available in the near future. But there are victims now. You do not even have to think the US government is doing this, but it is. Our boys will be targeted with these sorts of weapons in future wars. For the purposes of this essay, I assume that the reader has a general grasp of the type of mind control manipulations being discussed, and I consider possible motivations a harasser, monitor, or controller, or group thereof might have to commit such vicious crimes. Because this essay is intended to get people thinking, the possible motives will not necessarily be linked to any particular technological method, but the reader with some common sense will see what methods might be used in each case and will no doubt be able to think of combinations and motivations not directly mentioned here. To spoil the rest of the essay, the reasons boil down to money and power. technological equivalent of the atomic bomb. Many items appear on the list of motivations for mind control abuses, but the one primary reason why the technology was developed is because it is a weapon. This is the first motivation and why billions of dollars have been covertly spent on the technology. Of course, once the technology and techniques are developed, they tend to proliferate. Other applications tend to be found, depending on the level of corruption in a society, and organized crime groups other than the government tend to obtain such weapons and techniques. But the primary reason such devices were first developed and tested is that governments were and are developing and testing weapons. A recent Air Force Times article about a microwave crowd control weapon being prepared for deployment described such weapons as, perhaps the biggest breakthrough in weapons technology since the atomic bomb, and the particular weapon they were describing is far, far from the covert cutting edge. Indeed, a government would be negligent if it did not investigate such technology. But using the technology on people without their consent, either in testing or in applications, is either an act of war if committed on foreign individuals or an act of treason if committed on domestic citizens. It is almost always an act of torture. It is important not to confuse the real motivation with the rationalizations or the cover reasons. Terrorists, and pedophiles are the currently popular rationalizations for usurping citizens' inalienable liberties now that the Cold War is over. A week of American TV would convince any unindoctrinated viewer of that. There is also the phenomenon I call spreading the blood around. This is the idea that the more people who can be made to take part in some way in a large-scale atrocity, to get some of the blood on their hands, the more political support that can be generated for continuing the atrocities. Some differences between the atomic bomb and mind control technology need to be pointed out. First, mind control technology is meant to be used covertly and deliberately. It is not meant necessarily to kill, though it can, but rather to ultimately control a human being like an automaton. Secondly, mind control technology is designed for use against the domestic population, rather than just against foreign targets. Who would want to rule the world? At some level it is stunning that an essay such as this is necessary at all. People have always wanted to control men's minds, not to mention women's minds. But people historically have also been manipulated again and again, by one group of people followed by another, by one big lie followed by another, often convinced that it cannot possibly be happening now. There is also a moral big lie where decent people cannot imagine that anyone could have the capacity to carry out such heinous atrocities and conspiracies over long periods of time, because they could not imagine themselves doing it. They have minor moral lapses like everyone, like ordinary people tell small lies, but they just cannot grasp the notion of the big moral atrocity because they would never consider such abominations. There always have been and always will be people among us who yearn for nothing but to be tyrants over other people. Let us be clear here on that point and never forget it. There will always be someone who wants to be the next Stalin, to choose one historical example from countlessly many, and who will stop at absolutely nothing to achieve this. This also means that there are Americans among us now who are just this sort of person, or lackey for such a person, living among us in our society. Do not let the big lie and ubiquitous American propaganda fuzzy your thinking. The threat is more likely to come from within the government than from someone's garage. Eternal vigilance is indeed the price of liberty. Motives for mind control. We finally come to the list of possible motivations for mind control. It is important to remember, though, that it is not the responsibility of the torture victim to second-guess the reasons the torture was committed. In this sense, the reason for the torture is generally that the torturer had the opportunity to commit the torture and thought he or she could get away with it. Nonetheless, it is useful to examine more mercenary or mercantile sorts of possible motivations to better see why mind control torture is happening, why it continues, and maybe gain some insight into how it can be abolished. Remember that in any group of people there is politics. This is also the case with the people involved in the conspiracy of mind controllers. So when considering questions such as, why don't they just kill everyone who speaks out at all, or other such questions, which can be useful to consider even if you cannot know the exact answer, it is important to keep this in mind. Mind control conspirators tend to come from the same culture and live in the same society with the victims. When they leave the underground bunker, literally or metaphorically, they go to live in homes and with families among us. The low-level mind controllers, like Auschwitz guards, probably do not know the whole mind control system either. Also, with advanced electronic sorts of harassment, the harasser could be half a world away with a good connection, but presumably still lives in a community among some decent people. Many interrelated motives are mentioned on the following list, but that does not imply that exactly one listed motive is the true motive in any case, or that the list is exhaustive. A useful comparison for how a victim might be used is a comparison to a slaughterhouse, where an animal comes in and is cut up and almost every usable scrap that can be used for anything is used. To use a slave auction analogy, if one slaver has a slave that is good for X but needs Y, and another slaver has a slave that is good for Y and wants X, then perhaps they can strike up a commercial transaction on their human chattel. Some might object that publicizing this list will only give new ideas to harassers. It might, but the only alternative is to keep the people uninformed and to allow the atrocities to continue. I also suspect that the people with access to this technology for some years have already thought of and applied all of these reasons, even if they did not express them this way. Here is the list of motives, in no particular order. Low-intensity warfare against the domestic population. This has long been the policy of the U.S. government, though it typically is not so directly stated. COINTELPRO actions are covertly undertaken to harass and discredit people who, for whatever reason, are in the way. Frank Donner, in his 1980 book Age of Surveillance, makes this point with example after example. In his phrase, covert surveillance and harassment has become an unspoken mode of governance in the U.S., so this newer technology simply fits right in as a more high-tech way to continue carrying out this mode of governance. A key concept which Donner points out, and which many Americans cannot quite seem to grasp, is that the government does not need to accuse you of a crime or charge you or try you if they can just punish you. A paranoid government does not even need to suspect that you are committing any crime, wrongdoing, or organizing at all, only that you might do so. These sorts of programs usually tend to target potential leaders and whistleblowers, though anyone can be COINTELPRO'd. Ideas to mind steal. In some sense this is just a form of old-fashioned spying updated with new technology that obliterates the notion of human rights. Consider what might be the first step on a slippery slope of rationalizations. Suppose an Iraqi nuclear scientist, or any brilliant foreign scientist or engineer, was of concern to the U.S. Suppose there is now this new technology that can literally get inside the head of such a scientist and watch him or her as he or she thinks and works. Not only that, it can be used to influence that scientist. Armed with such a rationalization, the covert action crew goes to work and sets up the massively invasive surveillance. Then, for years afterward, analysts can study the subject and extract any intelligence they can from him or her. Would such a program, if successful, be contained and only be used on foreign scientists? I do not think so. It would be used on any people at all, only limited by the cost and the perceived risk of being caught. Domestic targets might even be more tempting because the risk of discovery could be better managed. You would not even have to be a brilliant scientist. Some bureaucrat only needs to think you are, or that you are somehow, of interest. If enough people are targeted, then almost all levels of scientists and engineers could be targeted. If they had a golden goose, they dissect it. Intellectual property theft from scientists and engineers is only listed first because of the slippery slope example above. There are many classes of people who might be targeted for similar reasons. Einstein is quoted as having said that imagination is more important than intelligence, and imagination is even more important to covert organizations who effectively select against employees with real imagination. Other sorts of creative people who might be vulnerable are writers, plagiarism, other types of artists or craftspeople, inventors, programmers, etc. In an economic espionage sense, any sort of innovative or high-volume stock trader or business leader might be a tempting and very lucrative target. Dialogue and situations stolen from people's real lives can become tomorrow's drama. Patents, copyrights, trademarks, and any sort of intellectual property can be deniably stolen from these victims. This can deny them their livelihoods and makes them literal slaves. Statistical profiling of a population. This is like using non-consensual subjects in a focus group to understand what their likes, dislikes, needs, and trends are. It might be most effective with unwitting subjects who have not realized they are under monitoring, but can still be used on subjects who know they are being monitored. It is like having the ability to take an instant poll of a captive population who may not even be able to hide what their innermost secrets are. Anyone who knows anything about modern U.S. elections knows how influential and widely used polls are. This is just one aspect of the power of being able to statistically profile a large population. It is the statistics of population control, where some sample of people, which does not even need to be especially large relative to the hundreds of millions in the population, can be used to predict trends in the larger population. Suppose, for example, that an individual were put under surveillance and found useful to serve as an exemplar of a statistical demographic group, say of 100,000 people. That is, that person's perspective, ideas, and reactions could be used to both predict and manipulate the entire social group on a large scale. This sort of analysis is already known to take place. It becomes that much more effective with the focus group under even more invasive monitoring. In a commercial sense, the power to manipulate a demographic group is the power to get them to purchase goods and provide a profit. Every sort of thing is marketed these days. Advertising campaigns are created to sell politicians, soap, ideas, slurs, and anything else. Interrogation for secrets. This is another advanced technology application to old-fashioned spying. People can be brain interrogated for secrets they know. This may be used to reveal critical passwords, uncover blackmailable incidents, and obtain national and commercial secrets. PSYOP BDA. BDA is the military abbreviation for bomb damage assessment. In order to most effectively bomb a target, you need to know which bombs hit their target and how much damage was inflicted by the bombing. This feedback is then used to both improve the subsequent bombings and to revisit targets that were missed. One of Noam Chomsky's main theses has for years been that democratic governments use propaganda similarly to the way direct totalitarian governments use violence. Therefore, it is important for the cloistered elites to know how well their propaganda bombs are playing with the masses. Like with the statistical profiling use of maximally invasive surveillance, non-consensual monitoring can provide this sort of political control feedback data. Entertainment freak show. Sadism and voyeurism are powerful motivations for some people. Mind control victims can provide a live torture cam of an individual 24 hours a day, and may even allow the sadist to play at the controls and inflict damage or influence the show. It would be like an ongoing snuff film you could participate in. This may also be a part of spreading the blood around by appealing to some of the baser human instincts and then having a person on the hook for having participated, like has been alleged for some satanic rituals where people take a small part in a ritual crime so they are inextricably linked to the conspiracy. To suppress technology they cannot control. Many people believe that you can always be the best if you can harass and put down anyone better. This seems to be the modus operandi of the U.S. secret sector, where if they do not control the technology, then it is stolen, the original inventor or developer, or just student is harassed, and it can then be developed in secret. Even if they are not themselves interested in the new technology, the temptation to suppress any possible disruption to the status quo is always there. There is a law in Washington that there can be no building taller than the Capitol. When secrecy bred mediocrity and lack of accountability are taken into account, the Capitol becomes a very low building. Hired harassment squad for billionaires. It does not take long for some personnel involved in this technology and experienced with these techniques to leave for the private sector. This opens the possibility for deniable mercenary harassment squads. Distributed concentration camps. The federal government has historically made plans for emergencies which have included lists of people to lock up in internment camps. With this new technology perfected, the concentration camps can be distributed by turning each listed person's home and mind into an electronic prison. Vigilante groups. To control crime, or whatever they choose to claim they are targeting people for, a vigilante group can select people they do not like for extrajudicial punishment. Like most such groups, actually, controlling crime is just an excuse to pick people for victimization and to rationalize it to the members of the group. To control a person, like a world leader or assassin, or any sort of leader. This is probably the ultimate dream of a mind controller, or their own controllers, to take control of a world leader or other important person. This could even start from a young age, with the person groomed for the position of power and with members of the secret team influencing and increasing the opportunities for that chosen asset to reach a position of power. When trained from a young age, an unfortunate child might not even realize that the influencing was not normal, the secret friend that is not imaginary. Subtle advanced techniques could influence an adult without his or her knowledge. Even if he or she suspected, there would likely already be a pool of blackmail information and powerful psychological levers to employ against the person. The quest for controlled assassins, or Manchurian candidates, is well known. The search for such techniques never stopped and is still ongoing. Similarly, sexual blackmail operations are an ongoing reality and mind control victims may be utilized in setting up such traps. If the technology is cheap enough or if you have a wide-field multi-target device, you do not even need to target the leaders. Your army can covertly capture more and more of the inhabitants, or flick a switch on a wide-field device until it can march into a town down Main Street to a hero's welcome. Then again, once this is accomplished, there is no need to march in at all. Just keep milking out tribute from the conquered people, who never even knew there was a war against them. It is easy to parody this as just some sort of body snatchers scenario, but to military planners it is a very real thing. To infiltrate a group. In order to control, influence, or install a puppet leader in a group the controllers do not know much about and really do not understand, it could be useful to monitor a member or leader in order to learn what might be effective responses, ideas, or actions. For example, a religious sect they wanted to control. Another example would be for a mind controller to use information gained from the monitoring of a victim in order to better pose as a victim, say on the internet. Genocide. This could be the implicit or explicit result of a mind control operation. The group here is whatever group is selected for torture, which may be racial, religious, socioeconomic, or related to whatever other selection criteria is used. People under long-running extrajudicial torture are not free to just choose life even if they wanted to. People are forced to decide whether they should bring a child into the world to also be monitored and violated every day, without the child's or the parent's consent. They have to wonder about supporting a child when they are under ongoing torture which may intensify at any moment. They know that, at the least, the life of any child will be threatened in order to further torture them and harass them, and they know that the threat is credible. As a medical scam for money, these days medicine and pharmaceuticals represent big money. If the cover lie for mind control abuses is mental illness, then some mind control victims will be misdiagnosed as mentally ill, rather than as torture victims, and given, or even forced, treatment and medication. An unscrupulous company or group of individuals could exploit this fact to make money off the suffering of the mind control victims. To predict and preempt actions. Besides wanting to just control behavior, a running trend is to want to predict behavior, obviously before it happens. But the sort of data that is needed to predict behavior in detail is exactly the same as the invasive surveillance data used to control and harass individuals. Prediction is also a component in more effective control. We are already seeing instances where people's rights are infringed upon not because they have done anything but because someone predicted they would do something, based upon whatever methodology. Much of this prediction is just snake oil and pseudoscience, but that does not change the fact that the rights infringement is very real. There is also a statistical and scientific methodology to prediction which undoubtedly will improve with time. If you can accurately predict someone's actions, you can move to preempt those actions even before they are taken. To train agents to perform any of these actions, as professional torturing scum either retire, move into other sectors, or quit in disgust, new agents must be hired to take their places. If the system is expanding, then new people need to be hired to enlarge the system, or to automate the system with computers so fewer monitors can control more and more people. These people need to be trained in the special juvenile and idiotic barbarity the US mind controllers love to inflict. Therefore, fresh victims must continually be selected from the population so these sadistic pigs can practice their torture techniques. To intimidate a population by making examples of people. If it were an open secret that people can be selected for any reason for mind control torture, then the population in on the open secret would be intimidated, if not terrified, that any one of them could be the next victim. This is just a new method of violence by which a regime of thugs can control a population using a long-practiced terror tactic. To perfect the technology and techniques and make it less detectable. This is the human guinea pig testing of the weapons technology, much like radiation tests on unwitting citizens. Weapons are built, human subjects are chosen from the population, and the weapons are tested on the non-consensual subjects. Some consensual subjects are no doubt also used, but that is not a human rights violation if the consent was truly informed. After these tests, the weapons lab analyzes the terrorized or influenced or manipulated responses of the subjects in a successful test and refines the weapon system. A part of this testing also serves to help close all avenues of response and redress which might be open to the human subjects, and which later domestic targets of the weapon might have. Any response the victim tries to make is monitored, and if it might be successful, then this loophole in the system of denying justice is closed. For example, a lawyer might be used to attempt to see what legal strategies he or she might think of so they could be rendered ineffective. A technical person would be observed as he or she tried to understand, measure, and block the effects of the weapons system. This would be valuable feedback to the designers, and might even provide them with ideas. Note that for this particular aspect of the torture, it is important that the victim know he or she is being attacked violated. Of course, a victim has little choice but to try to resist or else to willingly become a slave, which still would not likely stop the harassment. He or she must constantly think about the testing because it is typically ongoing, day and night. That is just the vicious catch-22 that victims must deal with and is a part of why it is torture. I am not trying to discourage any victim from taking whatever action they decide is the best course in such a horrible situation. Various unwitting spy scenarios. Perhaps the best spy is one who does not even know he or she is a spy. He or she cannot reveal it even under the most extreme torture because he or she does not know it. Such people can be infiltrated into any group or just selected out of any particular group and wired up. In a domestic social sense, inmates in prisons can be wired up before they are released so their monitors can peep into any criminal underworld activity which they might enter into after being freed. Of course, it is important not to confuse the secret police with the regular police and law enforcement, though there is certainly overlap. To steal negotiating strategies or information. Arms control, treaties, business negotiations. To conceal scientific and philosophical insights into human existence. One of the things repressive societies fear is new ideas and new ways of thinking. Scientific advances have been made which could revolutionize the ways man views himself, to use the masculine form, but for some people this represents a potential threat to their power. The new technologies could also potentially help our aging relatives, for example, if used in a humane and consensual way. But it is a difficult philosophical shift to acknowledge that now our own silent thoughts might not be private, or might not really be our own. This is one of the difficulties in getting people to understand mind control crimes. Remember also that mind controllers have no compunction or restriction against using any lies or deceptions or defiling and desecrating any religion in an attempt to manipulate people. Human guinea pigs for medical or psychological research. Once people are under ongoing, invasive surveillance, they can become guinea pigs for any sort of medical or psychological human testing that needs continued monitoring. This is a lucrative business now. For example, if a person were knocked out one day by whatever method and had a patch of skin rubbed with some chemical under development or of concern, then the experimenters could watch the person's own response to the potential poisoning. Psychological research has even larger potential for abuse. Real field testing. To maintain the ongoing mind control conspiracy. Because atrocities have been committed, atrocities continue to be committed to conceal them. The mind control technology and harassment network is used to keep the secret system secret, punish whistleblowers, and of course increase profits at whatever cost to human dignity. Conclusions. Given that there is a long list of possible motives, hundreds of people, at the least, claiming to be victims of exactly this sort of technology, the known development of the technology, a history of such abuses, and the continued cover-ups of acknowledged MKULTRA and other mind control victims in the population, it seems reasonable to conclude that non-consensual testing and harassment is still going on with the latest technology. The questions are, who are the victims, how many are there, what was and is being done to them, and how can this extrajudicial torture of the domestic population be stopped as soon as possible?